And welcome back. This is Project 180, the podcast where we talk about project management stuff. Today we've got actually somebody else just joining the call. I'm clicking the button. So today we've got Scott Thiel guesting with me. Morning, Scott.
Morning.
How you doing today?
Great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, thanks. We've got a slightly growing crowd here of people who may want to jump in and listen in and ask some questions, which is fantastic. Scott, you and I have kind of known each other for a while. I think this is the first time we ever actually had like a conversation face to face. I know I've seen you in passing various times, and like we talked on the phone a couple times years ago. So it's nice to see you.
Right. It's funny because I think we did this once, probably 10 years ago, if not longer now, when I was involved early on with the community association, and you had been running of dial-up podcast, I think, at the time. Mm-hmm. And podcasting was still kind of fairly new back, in the 2010s. And but I think this is the first time we've actually seen each other face to face, where we haven't passed, in the grocery store or at Winners or something like that.
Yeah. It's fun. It's a weird new kind of relationship in the 21st century.
Right? It is, totally.
Scott, you have a pretty interesting career and a very different career from mine. I know we have a lot of things in common. Certainly, we're joking about our kids playing trombone and stuff like that earlier. But you've had a pretty interesting career. So I'm wondering if you just give me a bit of a lowdown of where you've been and kind of how you landed where you are now.
Sure. Straight out of high school, I decided I didn't want to be in the University of Western Ontario music program with honors in education and joined the Army. 19 years old, and that was back in 1990. Had a career 22 years, half of that in the infantry, and then the second half of that as an ammunition technician, a rocket surgeon, basically. So with that, I got all of my explosive ordnance disposal qualifications, and a lot of other kind of interesting experiences while I was an ammo tech. I became the course director at the Canadian Forces Explosive School in 2010. And then the company I work for today decided that they needed a product specialist for the explosive ordnance disposal personal protective equipment product line. And I applied for it and got the job. Basically, from being a ammunition technician sergeant to being Mr. Scott Thiel was 33 days. I put in a 30-day release, moved everybody from Borden, Ontario to Ottawa, established a home here in Riverside South, and that's history. And I've been with Med-Eng now for 12 years this June.
And that must have been a pretty crazy 33 days.
Yeah, it was insane because you have to turn in all of your kit. You have to clear out of the military, which isn't easy. For whatever reason, the military never wants to let you go, and they make it as hard as possible for you to get out. But yeah, it was a panic, to say the least, to get out. And they offered me a job and said, "We need you for this date," and I'm like, "Okay, I'm doing this."
Yeah, it's wild and an impressive story. I mean, obviously, your knowledge is very niched in exactly what they needed,
right?
And in terms of being a product manager, and kind of running that side of things, how did you pivot your knowledge? Like, you obviously have all this in-depth knowledge of all this equipment. How did you take that and then start working with teams designing it? Like, how do you kind of apply that knowledge?
Yeah, so in 2005 I got my IEDD course, my improvised explosive device disposal course, when I came back from Afghanistan in 2005. As soon as I put on a bomb suit, I said, I would really love to work for the company that makes these. And now I do. So what that is you've taken all of that knowledge of how bombs work, because an IED, an improvised explosive device, is designed to terrorize an individual. And specifically, it's designed to kill the bomb tech. So what we have to do is we have to design personal protective equipment that can protect the bomb tech when he approaches a device. Now, you you're not just walking up to IEDs. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to do beforehand, remote approach and reconnaissance and all of that stuff. Usually the last thing you want to do is put on a bomb suit because it weighs 65 pounds. You can't think when you're in it. You're hot and sweaty. All of these things that you have to consider. So I took a lot of that knowledge that I had about how IEDs work and how blast effects and fragmentation effects on the human body are considered when designing ammunition and explosives, and just applied that to what I was then doing as a product specialist. It took them about a year after I was hired to make me the product manager. The one key was that my product manager had to quit, and he did. And then they were gracious enough about a year after that to promote me into the job I'm at today. And it's interesting, and as I am progressing as a product manager and into business development, I'm getting farther away from being that army guy and being that guy that used to sneak up on unexploded grenades for a living. And now I'm, the person that's sitting by, working hand in hand with the project management team and the product development teams to push out new and interesting things that are technologically advanced, that are going to do the job that we say that they're going to do, and that are providing key features that our customer base is expecting from us. That was a lot.
Yeah. It is. And I mean, it's certainly my experience in project management. I've worked in not-for-profits, I've worked in high tech, software development. Like, this is a very new concept for me. I know very little about it. So I'm going to ask you maybe some very basic questions, because I think the audience who might be watching this will be, maybe in the same boat. But because as a project manager, all this screams to me is risk management. I know there's more to it, but that's the biggest flag that comes up for me initially, right? Is because you're talking literal life and death situations.
Yep.
You're talking about having to be of a certain certain mindset, walking into a situation where somebody's using this product, they've got this suit on, they have a job to do. Like the mindfulness of that, the state of mind they must be in, must be part of this discussion as well. But how do you apply that risk management side of it? Because because you said before we even came on here, these are your friends, these were your former colleagues, the people who are using this equipment. It's not somebody that there's even a personal attachment to you in that respect. So how do you manage that in yourself, and then with the project management teams actually developing this technology? So
the first thing that you have to impart on the product development teams and the project manager, when we're actually drafting a functional specification, the thing that you keep in mind is that device wants to kill you. It was specifically designed to end your life. So when you're walking up there, you have to keep that in the back of your mind the whole time. But then you also have to keep in mind that heat management, comfort, weight, all of these things also have to be considered. And when we're talking risk, it's not just about the risk to the operator, because that is given. Every operator goes through the exact same thing. It's, a lot of our teams are one deep. What happens if that guy gets sick? What happens if they get pulled onto a different project? We categorize projects by priority. And a lot of the time, product development isn't a number one priority. We may have a contract from a university, or the U.S. government might have us working on something for them. That becomes priority one, because they have timelines, they have a schedule, and they have milestones that we have to achieve. So that becomes the first priority, and all this really kind of cool life-saving product development stuff that we do becomes kind of a second thing. So that schedule, that budget, all of those things slide. And that's the hardest thing that we have to deal with, is sliding to the right of all of these different things that we have to do. We developed a live video camera, and we had every intention of doing a live video feed for the most recent bomb suit. As soon as we launched the EUD-10 in 2016, We actually launched that live video camera 3 years ago.
Mhm.
It took us 5 years nearly to get that project to a point where we could dedicate electronics and mechanical design resources to actually get that camera up and operational. The stuff is always sliding all over the place, and I'm happy that I am not a project manager in that regard, because they have a lot to think about, and they're not just running one project. We have kind of two now. One does product development and one does customer support
Mhm.
projects. And, we have 10, 15 projects on the go, product development, sorry, and probably 5 or 6 contracts that we're currently managing. And
Yeah.
everybody chips in. Everybody has to chip in, despite what you're doing or what your role in the company might be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly in my experience, and I've seen most, project managers' experiences, there's always going to be some kind of, like say, sliding to the right of certain features, schedules, something's going to pop up. But the reality of this is that there's, you're connected to the risks are so significant. You're emotionally connected to it. This is the right thing to do, but
Right.
you still have to balance off the other constraints. You have to balance off the budget. This would be a great feature to have, but it's going to cost us $10 million, making up a number to do. We don't have the budget for that. So it goes off the list, right? Until maybe future, or maybe it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me, again, as a military, not in this world. Like, I know if somebody asked me to put on the suit, I'd be like, has this been developed by I want $1 billion budget, for this suit, and maybe that hasn't happened. But there's other elements to the project planning, to the design that certainly make it as safe as possible.
Yeah, there's all of that. I wish we were given $1 billion. In a lot of cases, it's way less than 500,000 to develop some of these things. Now, a multi-year project like EOD 10, that was probably about 10 years, $10 million, but really the last 4 years were the hard product development part of it. I was going to say something because I can't remember what it was now. This is the problem about getting old.
I noticed.
Yeah. You think of something that you want to say, and then 2 seconds later, something in your brain says, "No, that wasn't important." Yeah. So there's a lot that we have to consider. One thing too is the budgets of the bomb techs. When you're dealing with government organizations, it's kind of easy. When we're dealing with U.S. federal government, we have the Berry Amendment that we have to achieve, which is all soft goods materials have to be made in America, and all production has to be American. So we have a factory in Ogdensburg, New York for that. But because of that, manufacturers in the U.S. know that they have to make to the Berry Amendment, so they don't care how much they charge for their raw materials. So the Berry suits become extremely expensive. But when you're talking law enforcement, you have to consider these guys don't have budgets. Typically, they're buying things on government grants, and government grants are, they have to provide a budget 3-4 years ahead of time in order to pay for them. So there's a lot of stuff that you have to consider: cost, weight, all of the protection values, all of that stuff is in consideration when you're drafting one of these. And it's not an easy thing to do, but thankfully we have a good team that has a ton of experience doing this stuff, and we're getting better at it every day. And that's important, is to keep getting better at what you do, despite all of these things that want to tell you to not improve.
Yeah. Well, it's like any other product development. It's always improvement, and it can be slow, and it has to be iterative, and has to be conscious of, like you were saying earlier, resources. You're one deep. If somebody leaves, somebody's sick, like that changes the dynamics of the team, etc. So every project's the same, but it's interesting to hear this perspective of it. Like in terms of the team dynamic, though, you're saying everybody chips in, works really hard. Like how do you find that may be different than your experiences in the military? Is it similar? Is it very different? I mean,
so nobody in the company I work for could I ever convince to run at bullets that are being fired at you. Not one of them. And that took me a long time to have to come to terms with. You know, a lot of people are very set in their ways, you know, and sometimes you have to negotiate in order to get stuff done. And you know, especially when it comes to, we do not a lot of customization, but we have customers all over the world, and they have their own particular needs when it comes to suits. So, you know, if I have a soft goods designer who's working on something very important right now and is under a timeline because we told them we need something done, when I come to them with something else that is also very important because there's revenue attached to it, they don't like that all the time. And you have to, it's not begging, but you have to be really, really good at negotiating with people about their time and how they're going to divide their time up between projects. It's interesting, and there's a lot of pushback. You know, because the team is dynamic and the team works together well, doesn't mean we always get along. And you know, so you have to manage that as well. Thankfully, you know, throughout my career, through leadership training and working with other nations and everything like that, you understand different personalities and how people work, and you know, a lot of those types of shared experiences. So dealing with people is usually fairly easy. Sometimes Sergeant Thiel comes out though, and even to this day, that guy is still there. Feelings get hurt, but it is what it is, and people recognize that. You know, a lot of the leadership in this company is ex-military. And so, you know, despite you know, the various levels of education that a lot of our associates have, sometimes they have to listen to the Army guy, and you know, it's probably a tough pill to swallow. You know, after you've completed your second PhD and you're having to listen to a guy who used to sneak up on grenades for a living.
Well, I think it's a matter of, you know, in terms of respecting the diverse experiences right up the workplace, right? No matter what the workplace is. And I think that, you know, hey, you have to respect other people's communication styles and be aware of your own. Right? It was a critical part too. As long as people are aware and you have good relationships, I always find if you do maybe overstep or Sergeant Thiel comes out maybe pretty heavy, you got a good enough rapport that you can kind of step that back later and say, all right, we're good, and you move on, right? So sometimes it's that one-to-one relationship. Really, you have to foster that over time, and so if that does happen, you know, it's like any relationship. You have bad moments, you've got good moments, and it all balances out.
Even best friends don't always get along, right? And you know, you try and keep, at least I do anyway, I keep an arm's length away from a lot of the people I work with. But you know what? Despite that, you are friends. You know, you're on a friendly, you have a friendly relationship with each other. You know about each other because, you know, we have in the product line, both the other product manager and myself, we kind of have story time every morning. We get into the office, have our coffee, and then we tell some Army lies. And then, you know, you have the odd person who knows this happens every morning, and they quite often come by and, so what's the story today? Oh, back in Afghanistan, or back in Bosnia. So, you know, there are people that you work with and people that you are friendlier with. And I think that helps a lot. You know, they know our background, they know our story. And, you know, sometimes when, you know, when the PTSD kicks in or when Sergeant Thiel is having a bad day, they understand where that comes from. And it's important, I think, for me anyways, and I know for my coworker, Tony, for us to make sure that we're open with people. You know, we've seen things and done things that they can't even imagine. And, you know, based on those experiences, yeah, sometimes we're a little bit different than you.
And I respect that, and I really appreciate you sharing that, to be honest, Scott, because I know that that's not always an easy thing to talk about. But do you mind if I jump on that for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Just because I mean, like relating to diversity in the workplace and diversity of experiences, things like that. But PTSD being a very real and traumatic thing to have to manage. How do you find managing that in, I mean, this workplace maybe in particular, but with in your life even, because that's a hard thing to manage. But again, it comes back to relationships being open and sharing. Maybe that, like, is that a comfortable thing in the workplace for you with your project teams?
It very rarely becomes a thing, and I manage my PTSD by spending 2 hours a day in the gym. I have my time that I do. Plus, I've got ADHD too, so I pick up a project and then forget about it for 5 years. And oh yeah, I got to do that thing again.
Right.
So there's different ways of managing it. I find that being fit and having everybody around me too. Like we often and Tony are like we don't like people. We're just we just want to get our stuff done. Just let us do our thing. But in reality, having those people around does help, and especially when they come by and they want to hear something or they want to share an experience that they had with us. It's not, for some people it's bad, but I think a lot of those people too are kind of unable to get out of that and enjoy the experience of living. And it's something I do. I just love life. I have a ton of hobbies. I have to, otherwise I get bored and get antsy and wander around the house grumpy. It's you keep yourself busy, keep your mind occupied. You always have to think about what you're doing, but don't dwell on what it is, and that works for me. Fitness is a big thing though, I tell you. Staying in shape, even approaching my mid-50s, it's a thing. It's a real thing.
No, I've noticed the same, my experience too. I mean, it's all the stresses of work and life kind of seem to come out when you're, doing laps or running around the neighborhood.
Same with you. You're always doing laps around the neighborhood.
But back to the PM stuff. You were talking a bit about the customization earlier, and I think I want to jump on that as kind of like the last topic. And I want to ask too, I know there's a few people here on the call. If you want to raise your hand, ask a question, throw in a comment, please do. We'll throw the mic over to you anytime you like. But I wanted to ask about customization and planning that. And like, can you wonder if you kind of give me a scenario?
I can give you.
You've got your main line of development, but then you have all these kind of white label, I'm assuming, kind of variations that to meet specific requirements. Like, how does that impact the team and how you're planning things?
We do. We're going through a couple of projects right now with a couple of European countries that might rhyme with Sweden and the Smitherlands. So
not to put any clues out there,
not to identify anybody specifically. So they require, and with the one country, they require a helmet that we don't make, and the helmet comes from our competitor. So we've had to develop a relationship with our competitor in order to provide this helmet with our protective visor system. We've had to modify our visor to fit this helmet, which it never was designed to do, because our competitors aren't going to sell us helmets so that we can blow them up and kind of identify some of the faults in the construction of these helmets. And they do fail from time to time, but then we have to let them know, and then they go into a redesign process and then come back to us. But labels are a big one. We deal in about 100 different countries, just over 100 different countries. So a lot of our business, a third of our business is here in North America. So really, it's only about French and English, which we do both very well. But in Europe, we're dealing with France. We're dealing with Sweden, who is German, or prefer their products to be in German. Germany, who needs their product labels in German. So these customization, and it's a back and forth thing between us and the end user. And it really depends on, we're dealing a lot with government organizations, and they love to take their time on things. So if we have a label that they have asked us to make because it's part of the specification, we do our best as quickly as possible to design that label for them and then send them PDF proofs of the label, and then wait, and then wait, and then wait for them to get back to us. And while all of that's happening, the purchase order comes in, the clock starts ticking. We have to deliver a suit in 18 weeks, and they're not telling us whether or not these labels, and the label is the first thing that goes on the suit when you build it. So as soon as you start building a suit, it's assigned a serial number, it's given a part number, nomenclature, and all of that. And if the customer needs a QR code with very specific information, that has to go on that label. And sometimes it just delays projects, and purchase orders as well. So most of these projects are tied to revenue. There's another country too that has a suit that's got to be 30 years old now. The original design is about 30 years old, mid-90s. And we discontinued the suit a number of years ago, probably 5 or more years ago now, but they love this thing. So we sell this one suit to this customer only in a color that we never made it in originally, and with a lot of features on it that were never designed into the suit originally either. But this customer wants this suit, and every time they order 10, we have to change our factory up to accommodate this. And there's a lot of things like, the extra cost of having to reconfigure. There's the extra cost of carrying all of these materials and everything for this one specific customer. But they love the suit, and who am I to say no to any type of revenue like this? And especially if they're comfortable wearing this, then they're using the suit for demining in Africa. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to ever say no to somebody if they want to protect their people. I can't. And it's hard sometimes to convey that message to our design teams or our configuration management team to say, hey, this is what they want. We have to make that for them because this is how they believe they're going to best protect their people, doing a very, very risky job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. And in that case too, like I've seen similar things product wise or project wise in software industry, right? Like there's a company, it's an accounting software, for example. They just really love the way it works, and they don't want any changes, and they don't want any of the new stuff. It becomes a challenge when in the software world, things have to be antiquated at some point because new operating systems, new whatever might evolve. But it's not the same case in like the design of a physical object. Like there's not really a software element aside from maybe the camera that you were talking about earlier.
Oh no, there's a software element and a hardware element.
Okay, please explain then, because that's what I'm interested in.
Are the bane of my existence. The obsolescence issues we're experiencing, and it seems to have been since the Suez Canal incident, that everything is just kind of just become an absolute nightmare. And of course, during the pandemic as well, it was impossible to get anything. But we're dealing with obsolescence. We've had to redesign and we're almost ready to launch it, an entire new remote control unit for one of our suits because we just can't get the parts anymore, or the parts have become 100 times more expensive than they were 3 years ago. And, we're talking resistors and penny parts, right? But if a part was, 1 cent a year ago and we used 50 of them, it's 50 cents. Now it's $50. And that is a little bit different of a conversation that we have to have. So we're redesigning things. We use a lot of consumer products as well. I have a communication system that uses a digital voice recorder. This week it's Philips. In a month from now, it might be Sony. And because of that, we have to create new part numbers. We have to open up the bill of materials. We have to change the technical data package. We have to inform any certification bodies that we have that might have an interest in all of this. Like, we sell bomb suits CE certified. We're National Institute of Justice certified as well. So there's a lot of things that have to happen, and it becomes, we're used to it now. We know, but you have to coordinate with, your quality department. You have to coordinate with the configuration department, figure out who the lead designer is, or who's going to be given the task of changing the bill of materials and updating all of the paperwork. And then it has to go through the approval process. Engineering change requests are a very long process for us. And then taking that information from the ECR and pushing it out to the factory through the new product integration system that we use, it is another process again in itself, and coordinating with the two factories, how best to build this and how best to put this all in a attractive package for the end user, so that we're not just dumping a pile of stuff on their doorstep when it comes time to be delivered. It's intense sometimes, and there's a lot. I was very surprised when I first started at how much was involved in all of this. I figured, it's just another clothing company. How hard can it be? It's a clothing company that sells only 4 sizes of clothes. And those clothes weigh about 65 pounds each. There's a lot to think about. A lot of checks and balances, a lot of ISO stuff that we have to consider. There's REACH compliance, there's there's RoHS, there's all kinds of stuff that we have to design to. We're also EMI and EMC compliant. So we have to filter all this stuff out as well. So, you can't have any known transmitters on your suit. You can't be susceptible to electromagnetic energy. There's a lot that we have to consider when we're designing products, and when we're customizing products for customers as well, that you just wouldn't think that you'd have to do. So when you're having software issues, believe me, I know. Voice activation. So our suits are voice activated. So you can turn the lights on, turn the fans on just by talking to the helmet. We had Spain, who bought some of our first suits, said, we would like the voice activation in Spanish. We're like, great, we can do that. And we also sell to South America, who don't speak the same Spanish. And we had to create two different Spanish profiles for the voice activation. English. I can speak, and usually I'm about 80-90% correct in the voice activation on the helmet. I can get most things to function, which is probably still better than my truck, because every time I tell my truck to call home, it calls Sarah's mom. But it wouldn't recognize Australian English, so we had to create an Australian English profile. And they're all the same keywords, all the same commands, but it had to be filtered in such a way that it would pick up on the accent. And who knew that we would have to go through something like this? Not until the Australians used it and said, hey, mate, this doesn't work. We're like, oh, all right, we'll fix it for you.
Well, I mean, my first thought when talking about, localization like that, I'm Scottish heritage, so I think, people like to joke about the Scottish accent because it can be very thick. But there's also many variations. Like if you go to a country like Scotland or England, the English is basically the same, but it's pronounced so differently town to town. So that's got to be quite the dramatic challenge for something like this, because again, you can't have any confusion when somebody's out in the field working with this thing.
Yeah. Another one's interesting. We quite often from our Middle Eastern partners tell us we would like voice commands in Arabic, and my response every time is, which one? Because there are so many different dialects I've learned so much about languages and cultures and everything. And who would have thought, this time of my life that I'd still be learning those types of things. But it's just, which dialect would you like? And when you decide on which dialect you would like, then we have to get somebody to program that language into it for us, because we use their voices. We didn't buy Microsoft Annie or anything like that. We use actual end users' voices to talk back to you in the helmet. So they have to record the voices for us. They have to program the dialogue into the voice command system for us. We just provide them with a script and then a means to record it. And it's just, you'd like to be able to do everything for everybody. But realistically, you're not going to be able to do everything for everybody. You kind of have to go 80-20 on a good day, sometimes 70-30 if depending on what it is. But if 20% of our customers are 80% of the solution or the problem in some cases, then that's usually the route we go, just so that we can get to a solution. Otherwise, you're in a constant loop of redesign and of reiteration, and you just can't perform that way. You have to get a product out. On time, on budget, which never happens. I don't want to discourage anybody, but on time and on budget is a bit of a fairy tale.
and that's the most honest thing I've heard about project management in a long time. There's goals.
There are
and then
goals.
There's the reality, right? Like we've talked about this on this Project 180 with lots of people, but it's a very common thing. You set the goalposts, and okay, you're aiming for it, but as good as a planner as you might be, there's always going to be something that comes in out of nowhere, or some new opportunity comes in that takes half your team to go do something else.
Yeah.
So it's always it's ever changing. So
all you have to
be on
do
your toes.
All you have to do is eliminate humans from the equation, and you can probably finish your project on time and on budget. Just get rid of the humans.
And speaking of humans, and I just we'll wrap this up in a sec. But I've started asking this kind of maybe a cliche question, but if you go back and tell yourself 12, 15 years ago, before you started off this thing, a bit of advice that you've learned in terms of how to manage these products, how to manage these teams, what advice would you maybe give yourself to make this a little bit easier for you as a transition, even from the military into industry like this?
I don't know if I would change anything, to be honest with you. I'm kind of living my dream life right now. This is what I wanted to do 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago was Afghanistan. And to be able to be given this opportunity, I'm just absolutely grateful that Med-Eng hired me in the first place, has kept me on this long, and has agreed to keep me on for another 15 more years. It's I don't know what I would change, or even if I would change anything. I've learned what I've learned. I've made mistakes along the way. Sometimes I have a huge issue with when you don't feel like you're doing the right job. Imposter syndrome. I suffer from that a lot sometimes, because I was dropped into a role with no business experience whatsoever. Very little project management in the military looks a lot different than it does as a civilian. For us, project management is a standard operating procedure. It's something that you do. It's something that's drilled into you. And very, very seldom do you ever deviate from any of that. But it teaches you how to perform tasks efficiently, quickly, and get the job done. A lot of that I've carried over. I try to be as efficient as possible. I try to understand problems and analyze issues as they're happening, so that we can make the right choice or the right decision when it comes to issues, or to problems come up. You don't pass a blast test, or your fragmentation protection values aren't as high as you wanted them to be. So how do we solve that? And you work with a team, engineers, ballistics and explosive specialists, and project managers and everybody, and you say, okay, here's what the issue is. What are our options? And sometimes those options carry very hefty dollar signs around them, and sometimes those options are really easy to fix. The boss likes it when they're really easy to fix. Not so much when we have to spend money, because that money has to come from somewhere, and it's usually my live video project that the money is coming from, which is why it takes 5 years
Right.
to get that thing to happen. So, it's trying to figure it out, and using those experiences that I've had, and understanding that we are here to build a product that people rely on. There's a reason why we own 85% of the global market, because people have been relying on us for the past 40 years to save their lives. And we have a saves club. We recognize the people that have lived through blowing themselves up. And it's every day that is something that you have to think about. How is this going to hurt somebody or help somebody? And you always want to make the right choice. It's very stressful. Thanks for
getting your day started off right.
Right. I haven't even started work yet, and I'm all stressed out.
Well, look, Scott, we'll leave it there, buddy. But I want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. If can people reach out to you? Should they want to say hello or ask you questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, and it's Scott Thiel CD on LinkedIn. If you choose to reach out to me, I'm also a photographer. I don't know if you want me to mention that or not.
Yeah. Sell your services.
Phototiel.ca. PHOTOTHIEL.ca. I've been a photographer for 30 years now, and still doing it. I'm actually the principal product photographer at Med-Eng, as well as the product manager. And if you want to learn more about Med-Eng products, it's med-eng.com. And in there you can see what we do and the types of different products that we develop. And if you're, you see a job posting, we quite often hire students and are in the market for help every now and then. If you see something come up from Med-Eng, I highly recommend it. It's a great company, a lot of really interesting people, and we just do a lot of really great work to help save people's lives. Because you remember, the key thing is that that device wants to kill you. And it's our job to prevent that device from doing its job.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, probably very shortly from now.